Hi again guys, and welcome to yet another returning vehicle review for the world of Gran Turismo Sport, and this was a review which I had a request, or a couple of requests, to take a look at. The returning classic C3, or third generation, Corvette Stingray. Now, straight off the bat, this is my least favourite of all of the Corvette generations, but at the same time I can totally get why people would love it. It's a very unique looking car, even among the Corvette range. None of the other Corvettes really before or since look quite like this one, and it is certainly an iconic shape. You immediately know what it is when you see the car, you don't have to do a double take, and of course it spawned one of my favourite classic race cars, which we featured in Unsung Heroes, the Spirit of Le Mans 9.8 litre V8 Le Mans Racing Monster version. Now, this particular car is one which I went into, to be totally honest, without particularly high expectations. I didn't expect it to be bad, certainly not, but I didn't expect it to really wow me, because I never used this particular car that much on, for instance, Gran Turismo 6, or even in Gran Turismo's past in general. We used to, of course, have two versions on Gran Turismo 6, for example. We had the non-premium and the premium. The premium version had the rag top, and the non-premium was, if memory serves, I think the version with the larger engine and more power. I think it was the L88 or something like that, if I remember correctly. But they were cars which definitely had potential. They were fast, but nowhere near as fast as any of the other Corvette generations to come after them. And of course, you wouldn't really expect that to be the case, but still, a lot of what draws you to a Corvette is its all-round ability. It's a very competitive car, and in its own way this one is, but it just never felt like it was really, at least to me, all that useful in the world of Gran Turismo 6, or even earlier, to be honest. Back in the day on Gran Turismo 1 and 2, it was more a case of it being one of the more powerful muscle cars in the game, so it had use back then, but once you start getting more vehicles in the game, like on GT4, 5 and 6, it kind of falls to the wayside. That being said, though, going into driving this car, I didn't expect to dislike it. As I said just now, I expected it to be okay, maybe just updated visuals, it would sound a bit better, in a similar way to how most of the other cars that we've driven and reviewed so far have. Most of the returning ones, that is. However, I have to say, this has impressed me the most. Of all of the returning cars, even including stuff like the R32, the RX-7, the R34, and to be honest, even the Raptor, which is still my favourite car of the DLC pack so far, this is actually the one which the improvements, in particular, have actually really endeared me to the vehicle. And in one way, and unless you've played Driver San Francisco, this won't mean very much, but in a way I feel as if Gran Turismo has finally caught up to Driver San Francisco in a particular way. And that is that although San Francisco isn't an overly realistic game, let's put it that way, there was one thing in particular about that game which I've always loved, and that was how authentic driving the cars felt. The way the cars would wallow around, the way the tyres would smoke, even the way your hands on the steering wheel were placed, it felt strangely realistic in a game that wasn't trying to be all that realistic. And that level of authenticity, which I've spoken about not just for that game, but also more recently with the RX-7 and the two Skylines returning, and I'm sure with others as well that I haven't driven yet in the pack, this feels like that. It feels more authentic. Because one of the issues that I had with the non-premium Stingray in particular was that it just never really felt that interesting to drive. It feels very dull, very emotionless. It turns corners and drives quickly, but it does it in a very, well, non-premium kind of way, to put it simply. It doesn't feel like a proper muscle car or even a proper sports car. It was one of those cars which still felt like the PS2 era of Gran Turismo, but not in a good way. It didn't have the nostalgia of something like a non-premium GT40. It was just old and didn't have really anything to endear me to it. Even the premium version of the Stingray, it was okay, but I never used it that much. This one, as soon as I got into it, I immediately loved it, because the suspension, the way the car handles itself through corners, even without tuning, the brakes, although not the most powerful in the world, of course, that's the way it should be. The car should feel its age. And that was, again, to bring it back to Gran Turismo 6, one of the biggest issues with that non-premium and premium Stingray, although not as much with the premium, that they just didn't feel accurate. Many of the cars in the game do, but those never did to me. This does. It wallows around, it sways around, both laterally and from side to side, just like a muscle car should, and like a classic sports car should, and it makes it so much more fun. It's not just about being more realistic and making the car slower, it's about that fun factor. You want an old car to feel old, and to drive in an old way so that you can see and feel the differences of tuning and upgrades all the more so. So with stuff like suspension travel, softer dampers, more realistic tyre deformity through corners that GT Sport has the benefit of on the PS4, you can finally truly appreciate what a car like this should feel like in the world of Gran Turismo, not just something which should be slippery through corners or have really soft suspension, because there's a difference between having soft suspension and having old suspension, and for the first time ever I would say this genuinely feels like a car with old suspension, just like it should, and it feels so much better for it. Now, in terms of how competitive this model is, I wouldn't necessarily expect it to take on something like a Cobra anytime soon. You could try if you wanted to, but at the moment this car feels like it's kind of got a little bit of the market to itself. Now, hopefully we'll have some more models down the line which will be a good rival for this car, maybe something along the lines of a Jag E-Type, for instance, which could have a good rivalry with vehicles like this, or various other classic sports cars or classic muscle cars. The CHC Nova is a little bit overpowered, as well as the Cobra. They're not really great rivals unless you really detune the Cobra, but at least this is, once again, a good, really harbinger of things to come for cars like this. It feels better easily than it ever has before. And so far, at least, considering that this was probably the car which I cared the least about in the pack, I have to say it's impressed me more than all of the others so far. So, if you haven't checked out the Stingray yet, maybe you're not a super fan of it. I love Corvettes, but as I said, this is probably my least favourite generation of it, so if it can impress someone like me that much, then yeah, I'd definitely recommend giving it a try. But that's it overall for this particular pick. Of course, I'll see you guys next time, and for now, as always, thanks for watching.